In 2017, Toys R Us filed for bankruptcy. 33,000 people lost their jobs overnight. 1,500 stores closed around the world.
It is an end of an era. On Friday, Toys R Us stores across the country will close for good after 70 years of business.
And almost every headline said the same thing. Amazon killed Toys R Us. They were wrong. The company that actually destroyed Toys R Us bought it 12 years earlier. And on the day they shook hands, they handed Toys R Us a death sentence, $6.6 billion in debt, and called it a deal of a lifetime. This is the business autopsy of Toys R Us. And the real killer isn't who you think. To understand how Toys R Us died, you need to understand what it was. Charles Lazarus opened his first children's furniture store in Washington, D.C. in 1948. Within a decade, he made a bet that would define retail. Forget furniture, sell only toys. A store dedicated entirely to children. Stocked with more products than any department store could dream of, at prices nobody could match. It worked. By the 1990s, Toys R Us controlled 25% of all toy sales in America. 1 in every 4 toys bought in the United States passed through a Toys R Us register. They were the destination, the experience, the place every kid begged their parents to visit. At their peak, 1,600 stores, 60,000 employees, billions in revenue. They were, by every measure, untouchable, until someone touched them. In 2005, 3 firms walked into Toys R Us with a proposal. KKR, Bain Capital, Vornado Realty Trust. These are private equity firms. Their business model is simple. Buy companies, load them with debt, extract fees, sell them later for a profit. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it's a slow-motion disaster. The deal was $6.6 billion. Here's the part that should make your stomach drop. The 3 firms put in roughly $1.3 billion of their own money. The remaining $5.3 billion, they borrowed it, and they made Toys R Us responsible for repaying it. Read that again. They bought Toys R Us using Toys R Us' own future earnings as collateral. The company didn't take on debt to expand, or to build new stores, or to invest in technology. It took on $5.3 billion in debt simply to transfer ownership. This is called a leveraged buyout, and it is functionally buying a house, then handing the mortgage to the house. From day one of the new ownership, Toys R Us owed more money than most countries carry in annual budget deficits. Here's what $5.3 billion in debt actually means for a business. By 2007, Toys R Us was paying approximately $400 million per year just in interest, not repaying the debt, not growing the business, just servicing the interest on the debt every single year. Meanwhile, what was happening in the world? Amazon was growing. Walmart was cutting toy prices. Target was getting more competitive. And every single competitor was investing in e-commerce. Toys R Us watched all of this. They knew they needed to modernize. They hired consultants. They made plans. But every plan ran into the same wall. There was no money, $400 million a year, gone before a single employee was paid, before a single store was remodeled, before a single line of code was written for their website. Every year Toys R Us operated under this debt structure was a year they fell further behind competitors who were free to invest in their future. And this went on for 12 years. Now, let's talk about Amazon, because this myth needs a proper autopsy. In 2000, Toys R Us actually partnered with Amazon. They became the exclusive toy seller on Amazon's platform. The logic was sound. Amazon got a major retail partner. Toys R Us got access to the fastest growing e-commerce platform on earth. But Amazon quietly allowed third-party sellers to list competing toys on the same platform, violating the exclusivity deal. Toys R Us sued. In 2006, they won and dissolved the partnership. Here's what most people miss. Toys R Us then tried to build their own e-commerce platform. They saw the future. They wanted to compete. They had a plan. But they couldn't execute it, because every dollar of free cash flow they generated was already spoken for. servicing the $5 billion still sitting on their balance sheet. Amazon didn't beat Toys R Us in a fair fight. Toys R Us showed up to a race with a 5,000-pound anchor chained to their leg. By 2017, the situation was unsalvageable. Toys R Us filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which is not, by definition, a death sentence. Chapter 11 is reorganization. The plan was to restructure the debt, renegotiate leases, modernize stores, and emerge leaner. But then something unexpected happened. Word spread that Toys R Us might not survive, and their suppliers, the toy manufacturers who depended on Toys R Us to stock their products, started getting nervous. So nervous that during the crucial 2017 holiday season, several suppliers quietly reduced shipments or demanded payment up front. The shelves started looking thin. Customers noticed. Sales dropped. And the cash Toys R Us desperately needed to fund its reorganization never arrived. In March 2018, the company announced it would liquidate 33,000 jobs. Gone. Every store. Closed. $5 billion in debt. Still outstanding. The private equity firms had already extracted hundreds of millions in management fees over the years. Toys R Us was gone. So what does the autopsy reveal? Cause of death. Not Amazon. Not the internet. Not changing consumer habits. Cause of death. A capital structure that made survival mathematically impossible. Here is what every founder, every business owner, and every consumer needs to understand from this. Debt is not inherently bad. Debt can fund growth, create value, build empires. But debt that exists only to fund a transfer of ownership, with no corresponding investment in the business, is a slow-acting poison. Toys R Us was a profitable, beloved, functional business when it was bought in 2005. It had customers. It had brand loyalty. It had scale. What it didn't have, from day one of the new ownership, was any chance. The $6.6 billion buyout wasn't a rescue. It was an extraction. And the 33,000 people who lost their jobs in 2018 paid the price for a deal they had no say in, struck in a boardroom in 2005. That's the autopsy. If you think you know which company I should dissect next, drop it in the comments below. The queue is open.